Personality, place, provision. So we're called to be stewards of the gifts God has given us. Yes, remember that from last class? And yet simultaneously, we are what? Sinners. There's cracks in our personality. I want to say this very clearly. He calls us to understand our personality. He calls us to a level of self-knowledge that we do not start out with. Self-knowledge. One of the fundamental movements towards spiritual maturity is the movement from self-deception to self-awareness. Self-deception to self-awareness. And another way to think of self-awareness is just a deep self-knowledge. This is who I am. These are the strengths in my personality. These are the weaknesses in my personality. And left to myself, the weaknesses in my personality will leap out. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at Peter. Because Jesus Christ, he loved all the apostles deeply, but he had a special place in his heart for Peter. But what he does to Peter is, in a manner of speaking, he just beats the living daylights out of him for his own sake. I want you to turn to Matthew 14. Now, when you think of Peter, I want you in the back of your mind to be thinking from self-deception to self-awareness, so that when Christ releases him into ministry, he doesn't hurt people. So that he can minister powerfully and safely and sanely. He doesn't hurt people, he loves people. So he already had, when he was called to follow Christ, many strengths in his personality. But boy, did he have some cracks. Some were like crevices, just like all of us. So how does Christ act in his life to help him get to a new place? So I'm going to read from Matthew's Gospel. This is Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. He's walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, you thought they would be comforted. Oh, it's Jesus walking on the water. What could be better? No, they're terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Now Peter appears. His personality is so interesting, and so many of these narratives, when you get the group of the disciples are excited about something or they're terrified of something, he'll appear. He'll have something to say, or there'll be something he wants to do, or he'll want to coach Christ, or any number of things. He's a very interesting man. He says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. So Jesus is here watching Peter. Now here's the interesting thing. Jesus knew exactly what would happen when he invited Peter to walk on the water. He knew. He knew that Peter was not ready to walk on the water. He knew that he was going to go under. He knew how embarrassing it would be for Peter to get back in that boat like a drowned rat. And Jesus knew that was going to happen. And he invites him out on the water to teach him something about himself. To teach him something about himself. Peter, I want to use you, but there's something in your personality that's going to hurt people if we don't deal with it. There's an impulsivity. You think you're strong where you're weak, and I'm going to have to show you something. First step towards self-knowledge. Take a look at Matthew 16. Matthew 16, starting with verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But what about you, he said, who do you say I am? Now Simon Peter speaks up immediately. That's his tendency. And sometimes he's spot on, and sometimes he's dreadfully wrong. But his tendency will be to speak up, and sometimes to speak up before he's thought things through. Or to promise things and make promises he cannot fulfill, because he's not strong enough to fulfill them. Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus just extravagantly praises him at this point. And I can see the look on Peter's face. Yes, I got it right. Because what Jesus says in reply is, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you the truth that you're Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades will not stand against it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. He must have been so excited. Wouldn't you have been excited? If God incarnate is addressing you like that, you'd say, oh, yeah, I got it right. I knew I was like that. Rock. I have some insights to write home about. And I think linking in the back of his mind, thank God. Thank God for me, because these other 11 are kind of knuckleheads. Now, what's so interesting here is he names Peter, rock, in light of what he will become, not in light of what he is at that present time. Turn over to Matthew 26. Matthew 26, verse 31. Then Jesus told them, this very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. He does at least 3 things that he wishes he hadn't later. Number 1, he just directly contradicts Christ. Peter, you're going to fall away. No, I won't. You're going to fall away. No, I won't. Secondly, Peter promises that he won't. Third, he compares himself to all the other disciples and said he's stronger than they are. Can you imagine how they felt? How would you feel about that? Even if they all fall away, I am not like them. You can count on me. You can count on me. I promise, Lord, I will never fall away. I tell you the truth, verse 34, this very night before the rooster crows, you'll disown me 3 times. Peter declared, so he contradicts him again. This is not openness, this is not receptivity, this is not obedience, this is not acceptance, this is pride. This is a bloated pride. This is deep self-deception. Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And then the sad thing is, and this is I think what Christ sees, the other disciples are listening to Peter, and all the other disciples said the same. So the infection that is resident in the leader infects the group. And so what? So Christ, okay, catch this dynamic. Because Christ loves Peter, he brings him into the valley of tribulation. A valley of deep, deep pain. Now look at Luke 22. So with this last denial, look at verse 60. Peter replied, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Now look at verse 61 and underline it. Can you imagine? The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. They could see each other. Jesus heard everything he said, and with the last denial, he looks right at Peter. They looked at each other, and Peter disintegrates. And for the next few days, he is living in hell. He had done the very thing he had promised God he would not do. What do we do when we find out things about ourselves that are not what we want to face? And we want to scream at the top of our lungs, I am not like that. And yet we look at our behavior for the past 3 or 4 weeks, and our behavior says, yes, you are. There it is. I'm not like that. Yes, you are. I'm not like that. What do we do with all that stuff that's so hard to face? This is called a self-knowledge. How does Jesus handle things? Turn over to John 21. So this is after the resurrection. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. They're about 100 yards out. He calls out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, said to Peter, it is the Lord. Now think this through with me. If you had Peter's history and you realized standing on the beach is the one, your best friend, and you promised him you'd be there for him, and he was killed before your eyes, and you said nothing. In fact, you denied knowing him to save your own skin. It's the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and he jumps in the water. Now here's the great thing. And he doesn't start swimming across the lake the opposite direction. He is so excited that it's Christ. He jumps in the water, and he can't wait to get to Christ, even though he knows, I think we're going to have a talk. And it might not be wonderful, but I can't keep away from him. See, he knew, I'm convinced, he knew that Christ would know what to do with all that stuff. He knew. Now look at verse 18. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he says to him, all right, now follow me. Now follow me. Now here's what happened. The church historian Eusebius tells us that in 64 AD, both the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter were executed by the Roman government. Because Paul was a Roman citizen, he was beheaded. It was quick and relatively painless, over in an instant. Because Peter was not a Roman citizen, but rather a Jew, soldiers took him outside of the city walls and crucified him. But see, the wondrous thing is this. Peter had changed. He changed. And the very thing he had feared so deeply that first time, he faces with great faith. He did not want to go there. I know when Peter was surrounded by these Roman soldiers and he sees a cross on the ground and he knows what, he's seen people crucified. He knows, Lord, I don't want to go there. He gets out there. And what Eusebius tells us is, as these soldiers are preparing him for crucifixion, he says, according to this tradition, I do not deserve to die in the same manner as my Lord. Crucify me upside down. And according to Eusebius' tradition, they did. in my mind's eye, I see Peter on a cross, crucified upside down, looking where? He's looking up. And I see heaven opened, and I see his Lord applauding him. Peter, look what you did, because you trusted me enough to let me hurt you. That's the gospel. That's this movement from self-deception to self-awareness. And the end of the story is glory, not sin and not defeat. Glory.